Okay, kicking this off.
Absolutely. We'll call to order the Measure G/S Citizen Oversight Committee meeting. And the first item on our agenda is some organization and orientation and a presentation on the background of Measure S and the Citizen Oversight Committee. Is that something you'll speak to, Damien?
I will, but we should, if you wouldn't mind, have Lauren do roll call real quick.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Committee member Eskew.
Here.
Committee member Moffett.
Present.
Committee member Crump Shears.
Here.
Vice Chair Savano.
Here.
And I will show Mr. O'Rourke as absent.
All right. So the first couple items I think are pretty quick, but so this first item is on the organization, just an overview of the organization and committee background. And I'll be brief, but the council adopted resolution 2015-64, which established the Measure G Citizens Oversight Committee. And it outlines the scope of the committee and just some of the details about how it's composed. And in the first meeting of the Measure G Oversight Committee, the rotational method was decided upon. And so that's the method that we've carried forward each year, which is basically follows the council rotation. So whoever the mayor is the chair of the oversight committee, and the vice mayor is the vice chair, so forth and so forth. And it rotates like that. And that's pretty much it in terms of an overview. It's pretty straightforward, but I'd be happy to answer any questions if any committee members have any.
I do not, but anyone else? Okay, great. And I would assume the only public comment would be checking in with the clerk or with the way the meeting's structured tonight, or are we opening it up?
Yeah, check in with the clerk, and then she would usually call for public comment to manage that for you.
And I would call for public comment, but at this time we do not have any attendees.
Great. So no public comment then. We'll move to item 4 on the regular agenda. And the first presentation is receive an update on the transition to Measure S.
Yeah, so this is probably the most frequent question I get about Measure G or Measure S is, aren't we Measure S yet? Actually 2020, I'm sorry. In November of 2020, the voters adopted Measure S, and for all intents and purposes, it's identical to Measure G. The only difference is that the termination date was updated to basically be in effect until terminated by the voters, which was the change that was made. And that was Measure G and now Measure S. It all lives in the Cotati Municipal Code, and so it edits a part of the code to amend that. And then, so in this year that we're talking about tonight, and we have it's actually a transitional year because we have partially Measure G revenue and then the very start of Measure S revenue, which is all it functionally it's all the same, but the label changes. So this is kind of the tweener year between G and S. And to kind of formally move, actually at the last meeting on January 11th, we'd asked the council to officially rename this committee from the Measure G to the Measure S, and they did do that. So you all have a new title now. Now it's the Measure S Citizens Oversight Committee. And attached to the item is the ordinance. It's Ordinance 899, and that's the ordinance that was voted on by the voters, and that's what implements Measure S officially. But that's pretty much it on this item, unless any committee members have any questions.
Not hearing any, we'll move on to item B, which is a presentation on the City Council fiscal year 2020-2021 strategic planning goals.
Right. And then Lauren, on the last one, there's no public present, correct?
Correct.
Okay, great. Thanks. Okay, so every year, the City Council goes through a series of public meetings. First, and starting with strategic planning, and so that this is more of a high-level conversation about where things are in this current fiscal year, and as we're looking forward to the next fiscal year, where we're going to be with those things that we're currently working on and what we see as priorities coming out. So the strategic planning meeting is really the first step in a series of public meetings that end up in a series of budget meetings and the budget adoption ultimately before the fiscal year starts. So for example, attached in the report is goals and objectives for, this is actually fiscal year 21-22, just to give you an idea, but it's very similar to 2021, which is the year we're talking about in this meeting tonight for Measure GS. When you look at the goals and objectives, this is sort of it's just a high level overview of the kinds of things the council and the community talk about, and it ultimately drives what kind of projects or initiatives the city starts in the next fiscal year. So you can, we're kind of jumping forward a year here, but in 21-22, this is very similar to what the council looked at in 2021. The one difference that you'll be seeing, so when we come back next year, you'll see some of the implementation of this is goal 4, which is a new goal the council implemented in this current budget year, which is promoting an equitable, compassionate, and healthy community that honors diversity as a source of strength. Currently, that next time we have this meeting, we'll talk about some of those things, but one of the more visible things that I think everybody knows about and seen is the implementation of the SAFE program. Petaluma kind of kicked it off, and it was so cool we couldn't be left behind. So we worked with Roanoke Park, and we worked together to get a program off the ground here in Cotati Roanoke Park. Yeah, so that's been going for several months now, and we're gradually working on ramping up hours, because it's a 12-hour-a-day thing, 7 days a week, and it's gradually ramping up to more hours as the Petaluma People Services, who is the organization that we partner with that runs the actual program in the field, kind of on the boots on the ground program. They're hiring up and training people and eventually expanding hours. So that's probably going to take the rest of this fiscal year to get to full coverage, but we're working on that right now, and you'll hear more about it next year. And of course, you always can call us too if you have any questions and ask us about it at any point in between. All right, so for 2021, now flipping back to the report we're about to talk to at the next item. This was the list of stuff the council was talking about, and at a kind of a broad level, the main buckets you can, and this has been unchanged for several years because the council has been very focused on these priorities, which is economic development, infrastructure, and community outreach and communication. And once we go through that sort of outline what the council wants to see, then we get into a departmental conversation. So what does this mean for the city manager's office? What does this mean for community development and public works and the police? So we go through all that, and you can see in the attachment we have city manager recreation. So as an example, new housing program development, new legislation. We were working on the 80 accessory dwelling unit ordinance, or like a cottage housing. It's a cottage or a accessory unit. We were working on that and got that ordinance in place. We started work on the cottage ordinance, which is just smaller homes. So more affordable by design, basically, because if you build a large house, it just costs more. And if you build smaller houses, you can sell them for less, right? So they're just more affordable by design is what they're called. We did an extensive update to our land use code. That's what LUC means. Land use code is the basically thing that that we use when there's a new type of business, for example, that comes in and they want to do some activity, and that table basically says this is either allowed by right. In other words, they can come in and just get a building permit for it, or there's some level of community review, like either it's done at a staff level, or it goes to planning commission for review, or it has to go all the way up to the council. So it had been a long time since that had been looked at, so we went through that and just looked for areas where it was just unnecessarily onerous, in terms of the requirements. Like nobody really cared about this type of use, but we were making them go through the whole thing, and it's real expensive and time consuming for people to do that, small business owners and so forth. So we made a pretty top to bottom amendment to that. We developed a lot of online services and new content. Lauren led the fee structure review, so we did that. And then, of course, there was an election in that year in 2020, so we were running that as the manager's department. But this is all the things that we had talked about at the start of the fiscal year before it had even begun. Administrative services, just some high-level stuff. We upgraded our financial reporting software. We started doing regular reports to the council. Now, also, we were started the COVID emergencies, and there's a lot of concern about what that means for just like any business, the city revenue, and what that would mean for our plans for the year and the kind of services we can support. So we were watching that closely and reporting regularly to the council. We developed a budget and brief. So rather than the big, thick budget document, we also have now a pamphlet that summarizes the highlights of the budget. So you don't have to read the whole thing if you want to kind of know in a nutshell what the council adopted in the budget. We implemented a whole lot of new online ways to pay for things online rather than having to physically come into City Hall. And we got a new auditor. It's just a good practice to change your auditors every now and again, so that someone new is looking at your financials every year. And we started a pension section 115 trust review, although we didn't implement it this year. And that's just like it's just like a trust account where you can save for retirement costs. Community development, I think I talked about these things mostly, but also Jamie Lanes, that's a project out on, Ryan Lane is actually the street that it's on, but we like to call it something different than the streets it's on so that nobody knows what we're talking about. Anyway, Jamie Lanes is an affordable housing subdivision that's in construction right now. And we also did a zero waste polystyrene ban, and it's a polystyrene ban, and it also requires like restaurants to use recyclable or compostable containers. No more styrofoam clamshells. Encourages reusable containers. That actually implemented January 1. It was adopted back in this year, but to give businesses time to phase into it, actually went live January 1 of this year. Public Works, the Fleddy Ranch building project, where we rebuilt the ranch house and the water tower. We did a lot of paving work that year. And we did a series of bike and ped and vehicle safety improvements. So, and some of those are in the report we'll talk about in a little bit, in the School Street pathway, as well as wayfinding signage. And for police, a lot of pedestrian safety and enforcement. We upgraded the video system for our interview rooms, and we have electronic door locks and upgraded those. And a new type of it's a bowler wrap. It's kind of like a cord wrap that is just another way to stop someone. That's much safer than than some alternatives. And then we also have been working with other small agencies on mutual aid for criminal investigations. And this is sort of an outgrowth of the county sheriff was changing how they operate and not supporting cities as much, and especially in investigations of crimes and that sort of thing. So we've been working with other small agencies to kind of train each other mutually and help each other out and do a lot of that work ourselves. So that is what we were all talking about before this fiscal year started. And the things I mentioned a lot of those we got done, or they were substantially completed in this year. I saw one actually, and yeah, this is only being Zoom broadcast. It's not being cable or TV broadcast. The agenda states that, so just so you all know. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you. Any questions from committee members? Not hearing any for the city clerk. Still no public members in attendance.
It looks like we have one committee member for that question.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Sorry. Sorry, Kimberlyn.
Right,
I wasn't looking for hands. I was listening only. Sorry.
I did have a question about when we're looking at specifically some of these strategic goals. Now, not all of these goals would be funded by Measure G or S funds. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah. It's when we're talking about the strategic goals, it's more just for context and background. This is overall what the city was looking to do. I mean, for example, sometimes you have when you get down to the department level, you'll have like a water project or a sewer project that were part of the overall picture, but it's just intended to give context for the committee.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other comments or questions from committee members? Okay, any public comment?
Looking to our attendees tonight, if you want to make a public comment, please use a raise hand icon. That will end public comment.
Great, thank you. And we'll go to item C now, the Measure GS annual report for fiscal year 2021.
So good evening, chairpersons, committee members, and our community that are here and future on video when we provide this in the future. Tonight we'll be reviewing the audited summary of the Measure G and Measure S funds. Again, Measure G was throughout most of the year, and the Measure S funds kicked in there in April after the voters approved it in November 2020. So this is for fiscal year 2020-2021, which covers the period from July 1st, 2020 to June 30th, 2021. I'm just going to wait a moment for Lauren, perfect, to pull up the slides. So during this presentation, Lauren, if you want to jump to the next one, we're going to go over a little further what Measure G and Measure S is, how the funds are received, how the funds are then used for city programs, as well as what this audited financial report is for this oversight. So the next slide. So what is Measure G or Measure S? This is the voter approved measure. This was initially Measure A and Measure G, and it is a transaction sales tax of 1% that comes to the city after being collected by the state and is to be used for essential city services. So when Measure G was renewed by the voters in November 2020, it was now renamed Measure S, and it kept all those vital tax dollars in our city and will continue to provide these vital resources for the city until it's repealed by the voters. The next slide, please. So the sales tax within our city, it totals 9.5% currently. So what is the breakdown of this tax and why does this really matter? So 6% of the sales tax for some items, right, goes to the state. They take their 6%. 1.5% goes to the county or other special districts. 1% does come back to Cotati for our local Bradley Burns. And then an additional 1% comes back to us just for Measure S. The next slide. So really, how important can 1% be? You know, it's a really small number, you know, probably if it was added to your regular bill, you wouldn't notice it, but it is vital to our city. It brought in 2021, during COVID times, you might not think sales are strong, but it brought in approximately $2.9 million to our city to provide services to our citizens, to provide improvements to our streets, as we're going to continue to go on a little bit farther. This revenue is presented in net because the state does take an additional administrative fee from the gross receipts that they receive. But overall, it's less than 0.1% that they take before they give it back to us. So it's a good deal for them to have to manage it and get us our funds. So approximately this gets the city $750,000 every quarter. And the growth of the industries that are providing these taxes are in the construction industry, food and drug, vehicle purchases and registration for the cities, as well as service stations, and continued increased online sales, which provide money to the county pool, which is then allocated to us. Next slide, please. So these funds, we break them out both by type as well as by program. So our types that we look at are operations and maintenance, and then improvement projects and equipment. So we see those in kind of two different buckets of use of funds. So we've consistently tried to keep it around 50-50%. And for the last 2 years, we've been pretty much there. There was a small increase in operations from the prior year, but not significant, and we've tried to keep it aligned. Those percentages do change based on, you know, maybe capital projects aren't ready, things are changed a little bit, and so that's kind of what happened in 17-18, where we had a little bit more of the operations funding from Measure G at that time. The next slide, please. So that was the breakdown of the uses of Measure G and S. This is the breakdown of the programs. So we also have them, the funds go to fund the public safety program, the streets, sidewalk, and storm drain program, the park and landscape program, public buildings, and recreation. So all in all, the percentages again have stayed relatively similar over the years. There was a small decrease in funding between the park and landscape that was offset by an increase in public buildings during the 2020-2021 year. Next slide, please. So we're going to dig a little bit deeper into these different programs and what actual uses we had within these individual programs. So for 2021, for our public safety program, which is not, it's intentionally called public safety because it's anything we've identified as public safety. For 2020-2021, we had approximately $1 million or $1,020,913 that was used for these programs. And it included ongoing operations to preserve our local police department. So part of it was for that. There was a critical upgrade to our IT systems in order to make sure we can continue to do the best service possible for our dispatch and other services for reporting. We did a lot more during this time. It was critical for us to have those funds available for preparation and response to COVID-19 shutdowns. So having these Measure G funds allowed us to have that availability to meet those needs of overtime or adjustment in our schedules to meet the demands for our community outreach. We continued to invest in local street safety and traffic safety. We had a California Office of Traffic Safety program that we used and managed for that. that had additional overtime for our police officers in order to run that program. And so we were happy to facilitate that. We also had public safety or street safety construction programs, which included the Always Stop at West Sierra and West School Street, the 2 upgraded crosswalks at West Sierra, which are at Water Road and Cypress, as well as initiation of the local hazard mitigation plan, which is still ongoing. So those were some of the key expenses that were the usage of Measure S funds for public safety programs. The next slide. For the streets, sidewalk, and storm drain, we also we had expenditures of $1,068,585. These funds were used to continue to fund a full-time civil engineer, as well as continued enhanced traffic signals and roadway landscape maintenance. We had the completion of the 2020 annual streets maintenance and paving and striping project, which would included La Plaza, Henry, all the hub streets. I remember driving or trying to drive down George Street and realizing it was completely tore up, and I love driving down it now, especially the speed hump. It just feels so much safer thinking of the pedestrians around during these times. The design and initial pre-construction of the 2021 slurry seal and sidewalk improvements project. So this is the Bird section, Eucalyptus Avenue, part of Old Redwood Highway there between Eucalyptus and Myrtle. We also had that project up and going. We continued also for design. We were on a design kick and moving with construction, definitely with streets, with the gateway signage and additional wayfinding signage. And actually, if you're out and about around the city, walking the creek paths, you'll actually see them installing some of these signs now. So it was great. I got to go out and take some pictures and seeing them put in some of these new signs that we were designing at this point in time. The next slide. So the next piece of our programs is the park and landscape. And this program tends to fluctuate depending on the key projects we have going on. So again, we were more in a design for parks at this point in time. So more of it was spent on operations and maintenance, which those again are key operations when you're taking care of a park. So it might seem small, but it's a big deal when you're getting new wood chips in major playgrounds. You're rehabbing the volleyball court, which is getting significant usage again. And we're improving the vegetation and like the Pocket Park and LaSalle Park. We did also continue, they completed the revitalization at the Rhonda Folletti Ranch. So this is the house and the water tower that was completed during this 2020-2021 year. I know it seems like a long time ago, but it was a key thing that we got finished with these Measure S funds. We did also have some operations and maintenance for that. We continued our annual creek cleanup efforts. Even during COVID, we were able to fund those creek cleanups because those are still vital resources and uses for the city. We, like I said, moved forward with design on the Cotati Park and continued drafting these designs and plan for parks, our Parks Master Plan, which is then rolled into our 5-year strategic improvement plan for capital improvements. Next slide. So our biggest change, our other change is our public building program. We had approximately $350,000 that was used in 2020, 2021. And this was used for funding ongoing building operations costs and maintenance around our buildings. We continued to fund a building official, which provides inspection services and code enforcement. We continued to fund maintenance and repairs of our buildings, and the design and initiation of the re-roofing project here at the Civic Center building. So the next slide. Last, but certainly not least, is our recreation program, which is fully funded and really only available to us and as a resource and a vital source for our community because of Measure S. So for fiscal year 2020-2021, we had $278,000 that funded one full-time recreation manager as well as a recreation and facilities coordinator. It funded seasonal employment for as well for part-time camp staff and special other rec programs that were staffed by those part-time staff. We also included the high school program where they can come and get their service hours with our rec program by participating in these. So we've helped facilitate that as well. We continued even during COVID to fund services and supplies for over 16 different growing programs and events during the year. And we continued to coordinate the city food drives and business support during COVID-19, putting out social media, meeting with the businesses, seeing what we can do to assist them to keep operations going. That's something our rec department really took on and added to their list of things that they could do for our community besides just running regular park programs. Next slide. So our auditor evaluations. So even after we show, okay, these are all the funds that come in, these are all the funds that go out, those are then also subject to our financial audit. Our auditors, as we said, it was a part of our strategic objectives that we have a new auditor to be able to independently evaluate that, get a new set of eyes on our financial statements. They also look through these and make sure that they tie and agree that the numbers are right and that they substantially meet the criteria that's met under the voter pamphlets. And so it's also included within our audited financial statements every year. So the year-end audit was concluded in October 2021, and we finally reported our comprehensive financial statements in December 2021 with no findings from our auditors. So that's the summary of our revenues and our uses of Measure S funds. I'm happy to take any questions at this point in time.
Great, thank you very much. Any questions from committee members? Marjorie.
Thank you. This is my very first meeting, and this presentation was revelatory for me. I so appreciate it because I needed to know what it was we were doing with this money, and you just told us. Thank you. Now, my question is, as a committee, as the Measure S committee, what is our role? I know legally there has to be a group of citizens overseeing this, but I don't know what that oversight means. What does it mean to Cotati?
Well, I can try to answer it. Maybe Angela has more to add to it. But so the committee, it's an advisory committee to the city council, and the primary missions are to provide oversight of the revenue and expenses of Measure G and now S, and the auditor reviews that and confirms it, and so that's presented to you. That's part of it. Also, just making sure that the expenses shown in the report are consistent with consistent with the requirements for the measure, which is that they're basically spent legally, right? They're not spent in some way they can't be spent legally. Mm-hmm. But something like and I guess it's sort of the big third thing would be giving feedback to us on ways. So something we've been trying to do a lot, and we've been talking with this committee each year about, is several years ago now, we used to just do a budget and an audit, and some of the earlier feedback was really those can be such dense documents that are just intimidating and not really approachable, for people really to understand the main salient points of what's going on from both a budget and a financial standpoint for the city. And so, so that kind of feedback led us to look for, ways we can present. So for example, our audit into like a comprehensive sort of, it's still the main audit, but it's a much deeper document that goes into a lot of, it's not just a simple, it's not just a simple audit. It has a lot of statistical sections and other things, demographics, things that people might find interesting about the community and the kind of the, not only where we are in that given year, but kind of where we have been and sort of what the path has been to where we are now. So there's that. And then we also added what's called a PAFR, which is a summary of the audit, which is just a much smaller, and just, you try to get all the jargon out of it, all the accounting jargon, and make it just much more understandable for people that aren't accountants, but they just want to know in a nutshell kind of what the audit said. Same with the budget. The budget brief is a similar kind of document to that. So that's just like an example of some of the earlier feedback to really try to communicate, the finances and the financials of the city in a much more approachable way for the community, all the way up to the full, budget or audit, if people really want to get into the details of it. And so really, continuing to provide us input on, just general input on how we can, better educate the community on fiscal issues, and then more specifically Measure S, Measure G, so that, people are engaged with it, and they can, they can ultimately help the council, make sure that they're, that every year when they do the budget, that they have everyone is there at the table that has an interest in it and can help them, align the funding to meet the community's priorities. So that's kind of a long explanation of that, but that's, aside from the kind of the fiscal oversight piece of it, it's really just, the other main piece is really just giving us input on how we can better educate and outreach to people about fiscal issues.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Are we, may I ask another question?
Yes.
Are we limited in terms of the meetings that we hold, or in terms of our review of what's going on during the budget year? I'm just trying to get an idea of our fit with this wonderful pot of money that allows us to do things that we wouldn't be able to do otherwise. And so are we only going to have one meeting a year, or are we meeting every 3 months or every 6 months, or what's the plan?
Well, historically it's been once a year, although there's nothing that limits it to that. If the committee, would like to meet on a regular basis to get, periodic updates on things and, that sort of thing. So it's not limited to once a year, but that's been the history.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then I see that committee member Moffat also has her hand raised.
Thank you. I have just a couple of typos in the packet I'd like to point out. And sorry, I'm just kind of an attention to detail, and I tend to point those things out. So apologize for that in advance. But on page 92 of the packet, it states that the street, sidewalk, and storm drain amount was, you already know, okay. And that's an incorrect figure. So if you could just change that to $1,061,585. Okay. Also on page 99 of the packet, the Measure G committee members, it states that Michelle Riley is a committee member. I don't believe she is. It does not state that I'm a committee member, and I believe I am. Okay, thank you. Page 103 of the packet, I have a lot of problems understanding this slide, and I feel it's somewhat disingenuous. And so I don't know if that's just a personal preference issue, but that's there. And then on page 112 of the packet, it really kind of goes into what some of these funds are. And I was just wondering if I could get kind of a high level summary of what some of the contract services are in particular, just because I have a hard time gauging exactly what those are.
Okay, great. Thank you. Could I just clarify? I was following along pretty well there. On 103 of the packet, the cumulative funding of programs, is that the same page that we're talking about?
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, City Manager.
I think I don't understand those figures and
the
exactly where
percentages?
each of them came from. Yeah, the percentages.
Okay, okay.
So I'm more than happy to go through those with you.
That'd be great.
Absolutely, yeah, and it is different because we pull out all the capital and have that separate, and then it's the
Okay.
operation maintenance for the rest of it. So I can go through that with you. Yeah.
Can we see something other than questions and the question mark on the screen? Can you show us what you're going to talk about? Oh, that's great. Thank you. Okay. Any way to show us what Kimberlyn is talking about?
That Angela?
on the
I raised a
screen or
couple
no?
things.
Maybe just send her the link to the file so she can scroll down to page 103.
Oh, that would be good. I don't have the link to that file. I have two computers here, folks, my laptop and my iPad, because I'm trying to be organized. So whatever that link is. Aha. Thank you.
So I believe you were talking about initially the cumulative funding of programs. This piece on packet page 103.
Yeah, I think for me, I didn't really understand this one, and I'm
and again, so it's cumulative. So in the financial report, it would be at the end here. And then it's also, it takes out all the capital. So all the capital improvements here, and then it breaks out the rest of the operations and maintenance by the different programs. So again, so it might just be, you know, maybe it's misleading and it needs to not be included in the report going forward. So it could be stricken. If you feel like it's misleading, that's, you know, that could be absolutely done. We've just included new different things as other people have recommended things, or we've seen them on other reports. So we're absolutely, as Damien said, more than happy to provide more, you know, get your feedback and update things as you want them seen.
So for clarity, I think maybe to help understand that. So am I understanding correctly that, like, for example, street, sidewalk, and storm drain, the percentages reflected on page 103 are the percentage of, is the percentage of that project that came from measure S or G that was related to operations and maintenance and separate from capital? Do I have that correct?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So that we're, you know, because capital is a hefty piece of it, right? And so a lot of it, and so you really want to know what's the change in the operations, and it was also, you know, just the way it fits. So again, if that's not, again, if you feel like that's misleading, we can figure out another way to present this information, but that's how it is currently, is the capital improvements total to date. That's how much.
And I think what might be helpful also for committee members, maybe, and I'm making an assumption here, so please tell me if I'm wrong. The legislation that enacted Measure G and S is for operational expenses, not capital improvement projects, right? And that's why it's called out separately. So it shows do I have that wrong?
No, it does fund capital improvement projects as well as operations and maintenance. We just want to make sure that we're transparent and clear on the separation between the two.
Okay.
That so much is going to this type, which is construction projects, which you can see out in the, out in the city around you. Whereas sometimes operations and maintenance, you can't always see, but then you can associate that with a different type of activity where it's being expended.
Okay, thank you. Committee member Moffat, does that address your question, or did you have further to clarify?
I think it does. I think if I had a suggestion for next year's version of this slide, it would be two different pictures or two different pieces. One being the operations and maintenance divided out by categories, and then another being capital improvements divided out by categories. Because the way that it currently looks, it looks like the capital improvement projects are basically all street projects, just based on the pictures, because it's a very kind of simplified format. I love the fact that it's a simplified format. I think that's great and very digestible. I just don't think that it's necessarily giving the picture and the idea that you were hoping for.
And then if I just can get another clarifying, and you would like to see that cumulative and not just for the single year.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. It could be cumulative. I just meant like next year when you do it again.
Perfect.
It could be, cumulative, but just broken out. And so that it doesn't seem like it's 6 different categories when each one is kind of different too. Just so that capital improvement project is also broken out.
Great. And then were there other items that weren't just simple corrections that needed clarification from your list of questions?
Yes, if possible, I'd like to see kind of a high level summary of what some of the contract services are for each of the categories that are listed starting on page 112.
Angela, do you happen to have that handy?
Yeah, I can pull up my detail, but I'm sure you're specifically interested in public safety.
That's the highest figure, but I'm interested in everything. It's my job to look at oversight, right?
So absolutely. So for most of our contract services, we allocate contract service costs across our FTE allocation. And so because the police department has the highest full-time equivalency, they have the most number of employees that are directly funded, but they get more of the contract service cost. So this also goes to fund all of our other IT specific services for the police department and the equipment they have in their vehicles, the upgrades and such to that equipment. That's the biggest piece of that contract service. Damien, I'm not remembering the name of the
Well, yeah, there's
JPA, the JPA.
Yeah, the consortium.
Consortium, thank you.
Yeah. So like in the police department specifically, we are, and actually most cities in the county and Sonoma County are members to they call it it's called the consortium basically, which sounds vague, but because that is a vague name. But really what it is, it's this all comes out of Poly Class, when Poly Class happened, and Richard Allen Davis was roaming around the county, and different agencies didn't talk to each other. They didn't know that he'd left one jurisdiction and went to another. And so anyway, fast forward to now, a lot of the cities and the counties in Sonoma County all work on a similar communications platform for dispatching, as well as in-car computers. And that's a contract service that is a pretty significant contract service to maintain that. And it basically ties all the agencies together so that we're all operating on the same platform and can interoperate across jurisdictions. So that's a significant contract service in public safety. Angela, do you have some other just general examples in other categories even?
I have to apologize. My computer is having a little panic attack while I'm trying to open up a different document at the same time as running a video. So thank you so much for being patient with me.
Some ones that I recall off the top of my head, just an example, Kimberlyn, is we have a contract with a company that does traffic signal maintenance and streetlight maintenance, and so that's like a streets contract that we have. In parks, a lot of the sort of the general maintenance, like mowing and things like that, are done by a contractor. It's a landscape contractor. So that's another example. For buildings, the contract services generally are things like heating, ventilation, contractors to make sure that those systems are operating properly. Sometimes, and I believe also a lot of it's just basic operational contracts, pest control in buildings, that sort of thing, if that gives you a flavor. And I don't know, Angela, if you have anything else you want to add.
The other ones I remember is the animal control. So we also contract with City of Runner Park for our animal control. And so that's also a piece of that.
Right. They run the animal shelter in Runner Park. And for example, if our police department collects stray animals, stray dogs or cats or whatever, they could end up there to try to find their home or get adopted out. And that's a contract the city pays for.
I think another piece of it is also some of the legal stuff we had starting up with the program for our SAFE program. So we were initially starting up that. So there were some of this, but we want to really point to that next year for Measure S, when it becomes S, was part of that as well.
Okay. Committee member Moffat, you have a friend visiting you?
It's a future committee member.
Yeah. Family first. It's all great. It's all great. Any follow-up to that? Or does that address your question sufficiently? It's all good. Did you have any follow-up, committee member Moffat, or are you good?
No, thank you for that explanation. Yeah, thank you.
Great. And then any other questions or comments from committee members? Any public comment?
For our attendees tonight, if you can, please use your raise hand icon if you'd like to make a public comment.
Okay,
I
not
will
hearing.
end public comment.
Thank you. And so at this point, to committee member Crumpshare's question of, our duty here, I just wanted to clarify for City Manager Obid that the auditor performs kind of the first level of auditing and oversight to ensure that what the voters intended with this 1 cent sales tax, that those funds are being expended and expensed properly in that audit. And then we, as the Citizen Oversight Committee, are a secondary civilian oversight opportunity to meet the expectations of the voters and the city and the measure itself. Is that correct?
So it's generally correct. The one caveat I'd put on it is that, so when the auditor looks at it, they look at it, they don't necessarily look at the measure language itself to see, how it's spent. And if in that's more the committee and the council ultimately that look at that element of it. So the auditor is really more focused on making sure that all of the revenue that came in went to the right place in terms of in the right account in the city, and that any expenditures were properly tracked and accounted for, so that all the money that was received was accounted for, none disappeared, for example, and that it's all properly accounted for. That's the auditor. And then when it gets to this level, it's confirming that the funds were spent in alignment with what the council's vision was at the beginning of the year, and that it generally follows the intent of the community for Measure G.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Any other comments or questions from committee members? Okay, not seeing any hands or hearing any. Oh, sorry. Committee member Eskew.
Good evening, everyone.
Hello.
As a person who started this many years ago with Measure A, if any of you are looking for a history of how this came about and how it's evolved, I'd be happy to do coffee or a drink with you.
Great, thank you. And I just want to comment briefly before entertaining a motion to approve the report and transmit a letter indicating such to the council, that as a member of this community, I see the work being done and appreciate the level of detail. Also, the simplicity to digest it is much appreciated. And I'm proud of the work that you're doing, and always want to make sure that we recognize the staff in all the departments that are utilizing these funds, and proud to live here, and I'm just very appreciative of all of that. So with that, I'd entertain a motion to approve this report and the expenditures and transmit the same in a letter to the council.
I'll second it.
And Chair, I'm sorry, real quick before you vote on that, and just know that would be amended to take into account the edits that were discussed. Right, so we'll incorporate those in the final report.
Thank you for catching that.
I'll make the motion. We have a second already, but I'll be the motion maker.
Great, thank you very much.
And I'll go ahead
City
with a roll call vote.
Thank you.
Committee member Eskew,
Aye.
committee member Moffett.
Aye.
Committee member Crump Shears,
Yes.
Vice Chair Savannah,
Yes.
and Chair O'Rourke is now in our presence. James, can you hear us okay?
You're muted.
Yes.
Go.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. And with that, I believe our business this evening is concluded. It's nice to see everyone. Is there anything else, City Manager Obid, that we need to do right now before I adjourn?
No more business, but I just wanted to thank all of you again for your time and great comments. Thank you, Kimberlyn. Thank you, Marjorie, and thank you, Ken, for it's when we go through the year, we're all head down trying to get stuff done. So it's always amazing when you get to the end of it and you look back at what happened during the year. It's like, wow, okay, cool. That's it's impressive. I think we do have a very, I say this to my staff, but it's very true. We have a very, very good staff, and they all love the community, and they're all working really hard to try to make Cotati even a better place than it is now. So anyway, I appreciate all you guys being engaged, and and being part of the process.
Great. Well, with that, we'll adjourn the meeting, and I wish everyone a happy new year as the year kicks off. So thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Happy New Year.
Bye all.